So I'm a historian. I'm a historian of modern science and mathematics at the University of Edinburgh. And what that means in concrete terms, in terms of my current research, is I study the globalization of scientific knowledge and scientific institutions, particularly focusing on mathematics and related theoretical fields. So the basic thing I try to understand is what makes it possible for mathematics to be done professionally at a global scale in a way that crosses continents, that involves collaborations and knowledge networks that are more than just a couple hundred kilometers wide. And that's something that I think is relatively recent in world history. And historians think in decades and centuries and longer. And so when I say recently, I mean the middle of the 20th century. It's something that there's a distinctive shift in scale that you can identify. And I think the sort of the radicalness of that shift is not something that has really been characterized or understood that I'm trying to, my research team and I are trying to understand right now. And more generally, I'm really interested in how theoretical knowledge and how abstractions move through the world, and how the fact of moving through the world changes what those abstractions are and what they mean, and it changes how people can engage with the world. And so I think my entry into this conference is around this question of when people are trying to produce theoretical knowledge or trying to produce abstractions, when people are trying to use abstractions as a lens or as a means of intervening in global politics, what does the abstractness of those interventions mean for that scenario? I could say a couple words about what I presented on, if that would be interesting. So what the main thing I wanted to introduce in my presentation was to do the thing that historians always do, which is to historicize some of the themes in this conference, to put them in a longer time span. And I wanted in particular to draw out two different meanings of the word intelligence when we talk about artificial intelligence. On the one hand, the meaning of intelligence as reasoning, of computing, of sort of thinking systematically. And on the other hand, intelligence in terms of gathering information and organizing and accessing information. So this is the kind of intelligence that you get like from the Central Intelligence Agency. The idea of you have lots of information that can be kind of hard to gather and hard to organize, and how do you organize it and access it? And the point was both of these have been long-running targets of different kinds of automation, of machines, of different attempts to bring technology to the problem. And these technologies can be mechanical or digital computers, especially more recently, but they can also be things like books and airmail and index cards. And looking at that longer run of history of technological interventions that mix and match and try to address these two different challenges of intelligence, I think gives us a different way of understanding what kind of abstractions we're dealing with in the present world and what effects on connectivity and communication and really, at the end of the day, mutual understanding that you can see. So really, when it comes right down to it, what you're interested in when you're talking about artificial intelligence and global politics and diplomacy, when you're talking about mathematical research, which is my main area of historical investigation, at the end of the day, you're talking about problems of mutual understanding. And so what we want to know is what makes mutual understanding possible, what makes mutual understanding difficult, how is mutual understanding supported or obfuscated by different kinds of technologies and different kinds of relationships.
Wow, that's really mesmerizing. I mean, like, that was totally a whole lot of new information, interdisciplinary insight, and I mean, according to my personal perspective, that's divine. If you want to know my, honest opinion about what you just said. So, I've totally changed my questions after you presented this. This nearly, fresh information and insight. I've just changed my question, and I'm gonna reach to a new question, a new general concluding one, of course, and that's it. And that's it. Like how mathematics can help politicians to conclude precise results. Following a historical line, following a global line. With global impacts. I want to know how numbers or how quantification can help politicians and also the scholars of social sciences to conclude precise results. A precise result that might technically lead to the decrease in conflict, scholarly conflict and academic conflict.
Thanks. That's obviously a very challenging question, one that has puzzled philosophers for millennia. I think if you look at the long array of that question, how can numbers or quantification, or even if you look further back, the principles of mathematics,
I can be more
geometry.
personal. Like I can say how the Vienna Circle,
Okay,
or the
how
positives
logical calculation.
have contributed to the exactness, or the preciseness of the social science.
How this dream of exactitude,
yes,
image of
exactly.
exactitude. Yeah, I mean, again, so I think it does help to push the timeline longer. So the ideal of rational governance is part of what it means. Part of what it means to want to have a modern government, part of what it means to want to have an integrated polity, part of what it means to want to have a government that is accountable to or responsible to either the people, when the people start to be a thing, to God's will, when God's will was the main thing that mattered for government, to the prerogatives of a city-state, when city-states were what mattered. And so I do think we have to look back thousands of years to when ideals of geometric knowledge informed the political philosophy of ancient societies, or when the prerogatives of calculation, how do you weigh things and measure things accurately, and how does the problem of accurate calculation of weights and measures provide a basis for justice, right? Which is a problem that goes back to some of the earliest uses of mathematics and numbers 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. Those kinds of questions, I think, help us usefully reframe the ambitions that, say, the Vienna School, or if you want to go a couple centuries before them, the physiocrats in France, or the advocates of political arithmetic or rational governance, the creators of the field of statistics in the German lands and the cameralist states of the 18th century. They're united by an ambition of being able to come to agreement through a process of calculation. And I think one thing that taking a sort of social and cultural and institutional and infrastructural perspective on the history of calculation and abstraction tells us is that these activities can be very good at producing very particular kinds of agreement. And the question always that remains in the political sphere, in the diplomatic sphere, is that the kind of agreement that you need? Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, when we're talking about how different kinds of automated reasoning, different kinds of automated systems can figure into diplomacy or figure into communication, or figure into producing international agreement, you have to look at all of the things that allow calculations to collapse certain kinds of difficult distinctions, and enable certain kinds of actions. And I think the long run of history tells us to be skeptical of these, because you always end up encountering these problems of how do you get the starting point that enables the calculation to take place in the first place, and how do you get everyone to the same starting point? Or when you perform a calculation, how do you agree on what it means when you have to take it back out into society or take it back out into the world? And so the people who have been successful in using calculations to make political arguments, they've done so by winning the argument about what matters and what doesn't going into the calculation and coming out of the calculation. And often that's not been for the greater good. Often when people have aimed to produce an economics or a politics based on calculation, it's done so in a way that very explicitly prioritizes the values of certain people in power, certain powerful industries or entities or prerogatives. And so when you look at that long run of history, you always have to ask, when you calculate, who sets the terms of the calculations, mm-hmm. and who derives the meanings of the calculations? And at the end of the day, those are always going to be social and political and cultural questions, not calculational questions. So I guess it's a kind of a negative answer to to what I think I took as a very optimistic question and a very hopeful question from you. And history's job, part of history's job, is to throw cold water on that kind of optimism. Point, yeah. As much as that is a tradition of thinking and a tradition of optimism that has been incredibly powerful and important in world history.